In the summer of 2017, my best friend Alex and I decided to take a much-needed break from our routine lives and planned a week-long trip to the mountains of Colorado. We'd both been under a lot of stress, work, relationships, life in general, so a getaway to a peaceful cabin surrounded by nature sounded perfect. We booked a small, rustic cabin deep in the Rockies, about an hour's drive from the nearest town. It was advertised as off-grid, meaning no Wi-Fi or cell service, but that was part of the appeal. The first couple of days were amazing. We hiked scenic trails, cooked meals over an open fire, and spent our evenings stargazing. The isolation was refreshing, and we felt completely at ease. On the third night, however, things took a strange turn. It started with a noise. Soft at first, like the sound of something brushing against the side of the cabin. We were sitting by the fireplace, talking, when Alex suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I paused, listening, but the sound was gone. I shrugged it off, joking that it was probably just a raccoon or something. A couple of hours later, as we were getting ready for bed, the noise came back. This time it was louder, more deliberate. It sounded like footsteps crunching on the gravel path outside. Alex grabbed a flashlight and we cautiously peeked out the window. The beam of light swept across the dark woods, but we didn't see anything. "Probably just an animal," I said, trying to reassure both of us. But deep down, I felt uneasy. We locked the cabin door and went to bed, though I found it hard to fall asleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something tapping on the window. My heart raced as I nudged Alex awake. He grabbed the flashlight again and shined it toward the window. For a split second, we saw a shadow move just beyond the glass. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice firm but nervous. No response. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room with the fire poker and a kitchen knife within arm's reach. Morning couldn't come soon enough. When daylight finally broke, we stepped outside to investigate. There were footprints in the dirt, a man's by the look of them, circling the cabin. They led off into the woods, disappearing into the thick trees. Alex wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but I convinced him to stay. We'd spent months planning this trip, and I didn't want to let one creepy night ruin it. Looking back, I wish we'd left. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the uneasiness returned. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked and tried to distract ourselves with a card game. Around 10 p.m. we heard it again. The crunch of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. This time, the sounds didn't stop. They moved around the cabin, stopping occasionally, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was listening. Alex grabbed his flashlight and gestured for me to follow. Against my better judgment, we stepped outside. "Hello?" Alex called, shining the light into the woods. "If someone's there, you're on private property. Leave now." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the trees, we heard a low, guttural laugh. We bolted back inside, slamming the door behind us. My hands were shaking as I locked the deadbolt. We spent the next hour in tense silence, straining to hear any sound over the pounding of our hearts. And then it happened. A loud bang on the door, followed by another. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. Alex grabbed the fire poker and I grabbed the knife. "Call 911, he yelled, but I reminded him we had no service. The banging continued, growing more forceful. Just when I thought the door was going to give, it stopped. We held our breath, waiting, but the silence was deafening. Eventually, the sun rose and we dared to step outside. The footprints were back, circling the cabin once again. This time, though, there was something else. A crude symbol drawn on the door in what looked like ash or charcoal. We packed our things and left within the hour, driving straight to the nearest town. We reported the incident to the local sheriff, but there wasn't much they could do. "Probably just some drifters messing with tourists," the officer said. I've never been so relieved to leave a place. That trip was supposed to be an escape, a chance to recharge, but it ended up being the most terrifying experience of my life. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was out there wasn't just messing with us. The events of this story happened during the summer of 2015, a time when I was on a solo backpacking trip through Europe. I was 22, fresh out of college, and eager to explore the world before diving into the monotony of a 9-to-5 life. One of my stops was Prague, a city renowned for its beauty and history. I'd always heard about its Gothic charm and vibrant nightlife, so I booked a stay in a budget hostel near the city center. The hostel was everything you'd expect from a budget option: creaky floors, mismatched furniture, and a vaguely damp smell that seemed to cling to the walls. It was a shared dormitory setup, so I was bunked with 3 other travelers, 2 friendly Australians and a quiet guy from Germany who mostly kept to himself. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I spent my days exploring castles and cathedrals, and my evenings trying Czech beers in cozy pubs. On the 3rd night, however, things took a turn. I got back to the hostel around 11 p.m., tired from a long day of walking. The 2 Australians were already asleep, but the German guy, whose name I never caught, was sitting on his bunk, staring out the small window. He didn't acknowledge me as I came in, which wasn't unusual, so I just climbed into my bunk and tried to get comfortable. About 20 minutes later, as I was scrolling through my phone, I noticed a faint sound. It was rhythmic, almost like a low humming. I paused, listening carefully, and realized it was coming from his direction. He was humming a tune I didn't recognize, soft but persistent. It wasn't loud enough to wake the others, but it was unsettling nonetheless. I tried to ignore it and eventually fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sharp creaking sound. It was pitch black in the room, and I couldn't see much. My initial thought was that one of the Australians had gotten up to use the bathroom, but as I adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a shadow near my bunk. It was him, the quiet German guy. He was standing perfectly still, just inches from my bed. My heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. Was he sleepwalking? I didn't move, hoping he'd just go back to his bed. But then he leaned in closer. I could feel his breath near my face. My instincts kicked in, and I blurted out, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he straightened up and calmly walked back to his bunk without a word. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At first light, I decided I was done with the hostel. I packed my things quietly and left, checking into a small hotel down the street. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. I chalked it up to a strange encounter and tried to move on with my trip. The real horror began when I returned home a few weeks later. I was scrolling through the news one evening when I came across a headline that made my stomach drop. Suspected serial killer arrested in Prague hostel. The article detailed how a man had been arrested for the murders of 2 tourists, both staying in the same hostel I had stayed at. The victims were found in their bunks with no signs of a struggle. The suspect? A German man traveling alone. The article included a blurry photo of the man being led away in handcuffs. It was him, the same quiet guy from my dorm. My mind raced back to that night, to the moment he stood by my bed in the dark. I realized how close I had been to becoming one of his victims. To this day, I can't stay in hostels. The thought of sleeping in a room full of strangers, not knowing their intentions, is too much for me to handle. That trip taught me a lot about the world and myself, but it also left me with a haunting reminder of how thin the line between safety and danger can be. I'm a pretty cautious traveler, but something about small, off-the-beaten-path destinations always pulls me in. Last fall, I decided to spend a weekend in a quaint little town in Vermont. I booked a charming inn that had stellar reviews and a cozy rustic vibe. The kind of place where you expect to sip hot cider by the fireplace and unwind. When I checked in, the front desk clerk, a kind woman in her late 50s, welcomed me warmly and gave me a brief rundown of the inn's history. She mentioned it had been around since the 1800s and was known for its charm and quirks. That word stuck with me. She handed me my key, a real old-fashioned brass key, and directed me to room 207 on the second floor. After settling in, I decided to take a stroll through the town, grab dinner, and maybe explore a bit. The streets were lined with picturesque shops, and the trees were a fiery mix of red and orange. By the time I returned to the inn, it was dark, and the lobby was empty except for a different desk clerk, a younger man engrossed in his phone. As I passed him, he looked up and asked, "Did you find everything okay?" It felt like a generic question, but something about his tone was off, almost rehearsed. I nodded and headed up to my room. Inside, everything seemed normal. I freshened up, changed into some pajamas, and got into bed with a book. After about an hour, I heard faint footsteps in the hallway. They paused near my door, then continued down the hall. It struck me as odd since the inn didn't seem busy, and I hadn't seen another guest all day. At around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights and fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of faint scratching, like someone running their nails along wood. My heart started racing. It was coming from the door. I stayed perfectly still, straining to listen, when suddenly there was a soft knock. "Housekeeping," a voice whispered. I froze. It was the middle of the night. Why would housekeeping be coming to my room? I got up quietly and tiptoed to the peephole, but I couldn't see anything. The hallway light must have been off. Then I remembered. I had locked the door. Relieved, I whispered, "Wrong room," through the door. There was no response, but the knock came again, louder this time. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. The same young clerk answered groggily, and I quickly explained what was happening. He assured me no one should be knocking at this hour and said he'd come up to check. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I peeked out through the peephole again and saw the clerk standing there, looking confused. He knocked on my door and identified himself. When I opened it, he looked around and said, "There's no one here. Are you sure you heard knocking?" I nodded, my voice shaking as I told him about the scratching and the voice. He apologized and offered to walk the halls to ensure everything was okay. Feeling uneasy, I locked the door again and decided to stay up for the rest of the night. At around 3 a.m., I heard something that sent chills down my spine, the unmistakable creak of my doorknob turning. Slowly, I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and watched in horror as the knob jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. Before I could do anything, the noise stopped. Then came another sound, a faint click. The door began to open. I screamed and grabbed the bedside lamp, ready to defend myself. The door swung open, but no one entered. It was just darkness. I rushed to the door and slammed it shut, locking it again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the lamp. I called the front desk again, this time begging them to call the police. The young clerk came back upstairs, pale as a ghost, and stayed with me until the police arrived. They searched the inn but found no one. However, the lock on my door had clear scratch marks around it, like someone had tried to pick it. The next morning, I packed my things and left. The inn refunded my stay and apologized profusely, but it didn't help much. I later learned that the inn had a long history of strange incidents, including reports of break-ins and guests hearing voices at night. To this day, I have no idea who or what was trying to get into my room, but I'll never stay in a place with quirks again.